In 1952, an 8-year-old girl vanished from an isolated lighthouse during a violent storm on the Maine coast. No body was ever found, no ransom demanded. For 18 years, her disappearance remained one of New England's most haunting mysteries. But when a restoration architect arrived at the abandoned lighthouse in 2024, she discovered something hidden inside the walls that would reveal a truth far darker than anyone imagined. Welcome to Hidden Legends. Before we begin this powerful story of lost secrets and forgotten courage, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. Now, let's begin our story. Dr. Emily Carson's boots crunched against the frost-covered rocks as she approached Beacon Point Lighthouse for the first time. It was March 2024, and the morning fog rolled thick across the Maine coastline, making the abandoned structure look like something from a ghost story. She was a restoration architect specializing in historic maritime buildings, hired by the Coastal Heritage Foundation to assess whether the 150-year-old lighthouse could be saved or if it was beyond repair. The foundation had acquired the property 6 months ago with plans to turn it into a museum. "Careful on those rocks," her assistant Jake called from behind, carrying equipment cases. "They're slippery as hell." Emily nodded, her eyes fixed on the lighthouse. It had been abandoned since 1970, 54 years of neglect showing in every crack and broken window. But there was something else about this place, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She had done her research. Beacon Point had a dark history. In 1952, the lighthouse keeper Thomas Brennan and his 8-year-old daughter Clara had vanished during a storm. No bodies were ever recovered. The case had been classified as a murder-suicide, though no evidence was ever found to support that theory. "You okay?" Jake asked, noticing her hesitation. "Yeah, just thinking about what happened here." "The Brennan case? That was like 70 years ago." 72, Emily corrected, pulling out her inspection checklist. "Let's start with the exterior structure, then work our way inside." They spent the morning documenting cracks in the tower, testing the stability of the stone foundation, photographing water damage. By noon, they were ready to enter the keeper's quarters at the base of the lighthouse. The door groaned as Emily pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with decades of dust and decay. Furniture stood covered in sheets, now rotted and torn. The floorboards creaked ominously under their feet. "Foundation looks unstable," Jake observed, pointing his flashlight at a large crack running up the wall. "This whole section might need to be rebuilt." Emily ran her hand along the crack, feeling the cold stone beneath her fingers. That's when she noticed it. A draft. Cold air flowing from inside the wall. "Jake, bring the thermal camera." He handed her the device and Emily scanned the wall. The screen showed a clear temperature differential. There was a hollow space behind the stone. "There's a gap here," she said, her pulse quickening. "A significant one. Could be structural damage. These old buildings settle over time." But Emily wasn't convinced. She pressed against different sections of the wall, testing for weaknesses. Near the floor, one stone shifted slightly under pressure. "Help me with this." Together, they carefully pried at the loose stones. After several minutes of work, they managed to remove enough to reveal a dark space behind the wall. Emily shone her flashlight inside. Oh my God! Inside the hollow was a leather satchel, remarkably preserved despite the decades. Emily carefully pulled it out, her hands trembling slightly. "What is it?" Jake leaned in closer. Emily opened the satchel. Inside was a child's notebook, yellowed with age. She carefully opened the first page. Clara Brennan, age 8, October 1952. The silence that followed was heavy. Emily's mind raced. This was Clara's notebook, the missing girl. Why was it hidden in the wall? She continued searching through the satchel. A small dress, a hairbrush with strands of blonde hair still clinging to it, a photograph of Clara and her father standing in front of the lighthouse, and at the bottom, an envelope. Emily's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter, the handwriting desperate and uneven. She read the first line aloud. "To whoever finds this, My name is Sarah Brennan. I need to confess what happened on October 12th, 1952. Holy shit, Jake whispered. Emily read the entire letter in silence, her expression darkening with each paragraph. When she finished, she looked up at Jake, her face pale. We need to call the police, right now. What does it say? What is Mighty's? Sarah Brennan didn't die in 1949. She faked her death to escape an abusive husband. She came back during the storm to rescue Clara. But something went terribly wrong. 2 hours later, the lighthouse was swarming with Maine State Police. Detective Michael Torres, a veteran investigator with the cold case unit, stood in the keeper's quarters examining the satchel's contents. "You're certain you didn't disturb anything else?" he asked Emily. "No, we found it exactly as you see it." Torres read Sarah's letter carefully, his jaw tightening. He had reviewed the Brennan case files before coming here. The official theory had always been that Thomas, struggling with alcoholism and depression, had killed his daughter and then himself. But this letter painted a very different picture. According to this, Torres said, Sarah claims Clara drowned trying to help her during the storm. Then, Thomas attacked Sarah when she told him, and she killed him in self-defense. "Do you believe it?" Emily asked. "I don't know what to believe yet." This letter could be authentic, or it could be a fabrication. We need to verify everything. Over the next week, Detective Torres threw himself into reinvestigating the case. He pulled the original 1952 police reports, interviewed elderly residents who remembered the Brennans, and consulted with forensic experts to authenticate the letter and artifacts. The handwriting analysis came back conclusive. The letter was written by Sarah Brennan. Her distinctive handwriting matched samples from documents predating her supposed death in 1949. The carbon dating on the paper and ink confirmed the letter was written in 1952, not recently. Emily continued her restoration work at the lighthouse, but she couldn't shake her obsession with the case. She spent her evenings at the local historical society, poring over old newspaper archives and records. That's when she found something Detective Torres had missed. In a 1965 Vermont newspaper, she discovered an obituary for a woman named Sarah Morrison who had died in a car accident. The photograph was small and grainy, but Emily recognized the face. It was Sarah Brennan, 13 years older, but unmistakably the same woman from the photograph in Clara's satchel. She immediately called Torres. "I think I found what happened to Sarah after she left Maine." Torres met her at the Historical Society that same evening. Emily showed him the obituary, along with other documents she'd uncovered. Sarah had been living under the name Sarah Morrison, working as a seamstress in Burlington, Vermont. She had died when her car went off a mountain road during a snowstorm. "No family listed," Torres observed, reading the obituary. "No survivors. She died alone." "Carrying the guilt of what happened," Emily added quietly. Torres nodded slowly. The Burlington police report classified it as an accident, but looking at the circumstances, the isolated location, the fact that she drove off the road on a clear section with no ice. "You think it was suicide?" "I think a woman who spent 13 years living with the guilt of her daughter's death might have finally decided she couldn't carry it anymore." The investigation expanded. Torres contacted the Vermont State Police and requested a full review of Sarah Morrison's death. Meanwhile, he authorized a comprehensive search of the waters around Beacon Point. Modern sonar technology had advanced considerably since 1952. If there was anything to find in those waters, they would find it. The search took 3 days. On the afternoon of the third day, the sonar detected an anomaly wedged between two large rocks about 40 feet below the surface, roughly 100 yards from the lighthouse. Divers went down. What they brought up made Emily's blood run cold. A small skeleton, remarkably preserved by the cold water and protected from scavengers by its position between the rocks. The bones of a child, approximately 8 years old. DNA testing confirmed it within a week. Clara Brennan had been found. But the skeleton revealed something else, something that contradicted Sarah's letter. The forensic pathologist who examined the remains, Dr. Patricia Chen, called Torres with her findings. The skull shows significant trauma, she explained, a depressed fracture on the right parietal bone, consistent with a severe blow from a blunt object. This wasn't a simple fall. Someone struck this child with considerable force. Torres felt his stomach tighten. Could it have been from hitting the rocks when she fell? Possible, but unlikely given the angle and the force required. The blow came from above and behind. If she had fallen forward onto rocks, we'd expect to see frontal damage. This suggests she was struck before entering the water. So Sarah's letter might be incomplete or deliberately misleading. Torres returned to the lighthouse, this time with a full forensic team. They searched every inch of the structure using ground-penetrating radar and luminol testing. In the lamp room at the top of the tower, they found traces of blood that had soaked into the wooden floorboards. 72 years old, but still detectable with modern forensic techniques. 2 different blood types. One matched Clara, the other matched Thomas Brennan's records. Emily was present when Torres made the final connections. "Here's what I think happened," Torres said, standing in the lamp room where it all went wrong. Sarah's letter was mostly true. She did come back during the storm to rescue Clara. Clara did try to help her, but I don't think Clara drowned by accident. He walked to the window, looking out at the rocks below. Thomas was up here, drunk, when he saw Clara running out into the storm. He came down, found her with Sarah. He realized his supposedly dead wife had returned. In his rage and intoxication, he struck Clara, not Sarah. Clara. Emily felt tears welling in her eyes. He killed his own daughter. Sarah's letter says Clara drowned trying to help her. But I think Sarah was protecting Thomas's memory, or maybe protecting herself from an even worse truth. She witnessed Thomas kill Clara. They struggled, and she killed him. Then she panicked and hid the evidence. But why hide Clara's belongings? Why make it look like they both disappeared? Guilt, shame, self-preservation, take your pick. Sarah knew if anyone found out what really happened, they'd blame her. She faked her death once. She knew how to disappear. So she took the boat and vanished, leaving behind a mystery instead of a murder scene. The final piece of evidence came from Clara's notebook itself. Emily had been carefully examining the drawings, and on one of the last pages she found something that had been overlooked, a drawing of the lamp room. In the drawing, Clara had sketched herself, her father, and a woman who had to be Sarah, but there was something disturbing about the image. Thomas was holding something, a wrench, and Clara had drawn red marks on her own head. At the bottom, in Clara's careful handwriting, "Papa said Mama came back, but she made him angry. I wish Mama stayed away. Papa scares me when he's angry." This drawing had been made before the night of the storm. Clara had somehow known what was coming, or perhaps she had seen her father's violence before and feared its return. The case closed with a grim conclusion. Clara Brennan had been murdered by her father during a violent confrontation with his wife, who he believed was dead. Sarah Brennan had killed Thomas in the aftermath, hidden the evidence, and fled. She had lived 13 years with the guilt before taking her own life. The Maine State Police officially reclassified the case: Thomas Brennan, murderer; Sarah Brennan, killed in self-defense, no charges possible posthumously; Clara Brennan, victim. On a gray morning in April 2024, Clara Brennan was finally laid to rest. Her remains were buried in the Coastal Heritage Cemetery, overlooking the ocean she had died trying to cross. Emily attended the funeral, along with Detective Torres and a small group of locals who had never forgotten the mystery of Beacon Point. A distant cousin of the Brennans, a woman in her 70s named Margaret Foster, was the only living relative present. "I never knew Clara," Margaret said to Emily after the service. "She disappeared 20 years before I was born. But my grandmother talked about her. She said Clara was the sweetest child, always trying to help people, always trying to make her father smile." Emily thought about the drawing in the notebook. Clara, afraid of her father's anger but still loving him, still hoping to make things better. "She died trying to save someone," Emily said quietly, "even if that someone didn't deserve saving." The restoration of Beacon Point Lighthouse was completed 6 months later. The Coastal Heritage Foundation decided to turn it into a museum dedicated not to maritime history, but to Clara's story. The keeper's quarters were preserved as they were, with information panels explaining what had happened in 1952. Clara's notebook, her dress, and the photograph were displayed behind glass. Sarah's letter was there too, with a placard explaining the full truth of what the investigation had uncovered. But the centerpiece of the museum was in the lamp room. There, where Clara had spent her last moments, a bronze statue stood. A small girl, 8 years old, reaching out her hand to help someone in need. The plaque beneath read, Clara Brennan, 1944 to 1952. She died reaching out to save a life. May we all have such courage. Emily visited the lighthouse often after it opened to the public. She would stand in front of Clara's statue, thinking about the little girl who had hidden behind walls of silence for 72 years. On stormy nights when the wind howled and the rain lashed against the lighthouse windows, visitors sometimes reported hearing a child's voice, not crying, as the old legends claimed, but humming. A soft, gentle tune that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The skeptics dismissed it as wind whistling through the ventilation system, but Emily knew better. She had heard it herself on the night she found Clara's satchel, a sound that was both sad and somehow peaceful. Clara Brennan had finally been found. Her story had finally been told. And perhaps after 72 years of silence, her spirit could finally rest. But the question that haunted Emily, the question that kept her awake at night, wasn't about Clara or Sarah or even Thomas. It was about all the other voices still trapped in walls, still waiting to be heard. How many other secrets were hidden in the bones of old buildings? How many other children had died in violence and been forgotten by time? The lighthouse stood as a reminder, not just of one girl's tragedy, but of all the forgotten stories still buried in the darkness, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them into the light. Clara Brennan's story was no longer hidden, but how many others still were? That was the question Emily Carson carried with her every time she walked into an old building, every time she ran her hands along ancient walls, every time she felt a draft of cold air that shouldn't be there. The dead, she had learned, never truly stay silent. They're just waiting for someone to listen.